Hello and welcome to our fifth lesson on the rise of the Nazis, and in this class we're going to focus on the role of Nazi propaganda. This is actually quite a detailed class and analysis of why the Nazis come to power, and it might take a little bit longer than some of the previous lessons. It's an important factor in explaining why the Nazis come to power, or why Hitler is appointed Chancellor after the Nazi Party become popular by 1932. But we will also spend a little bit of time evaluating the role of propaganda, just how important was it, and that's something to kind of keep in mind. Maybe it's overestimated its importance by historians in the past, and therefore we have to be cautious in stating that it was the kind of ultimate reason for the Nazis coming to power. We also have to differentiate between Nazi propaganda before 1933 and after 1933. I think it becomes much more significant once the Nazis are in power. Before they are in office, it has maybe an impact on some groups, but less so on other groups. Okay. And so three things that we're going to look at today. What was propaganda? So we're going to look at a little diagram in the next slide. What techniques were used by the Nazis, and by one individual in particular, Joseph Goebbels, who was propaganda minister. And then we will eventually, finally, for point three, start to analyse the significance of propaganda and the role it plays in helping the Nazis come to power. So, three things. Let's start off with the basics. What was propaganda? Well, propaganda really just means the art of persuasion. I guess the term propaganda has been, to some extent, become a kind of word that nowadays is often seen as being about lies, or about falsehoods, or about fake news, I guess is the word that we use nowadays. And that is partly because of the way that the Nazis used propaganda, and maybe the way it was used in the Soviet Union or within other totalitarian regimes. But ultimately, all countries, all governments, all political parties use propaganda. It's just that the way that it is now viewed is slightly different to the original interpretation. Propaganda was, as I mentioned, this idea that you had to persuade people to come around to your way of thinking, to come around to your views. And once people had started to kind of listen to your political messages, and once they start to maybe think that the ideas of that political party are quite good or useful or beneficial to them, then they will join that movement or vote for that movement, and then the role of propaganda has been successful. Maybe in the 21st century, the term electioneering has been used more often. It really means the same thing as propaganda. It's about trying to convince people to come around to your way of thinking. And in this little diagram, you can see the clear link between propaganda and the two examples that we examined in the previous online lessons: ideology and policy. So you have a political ideology. From this ideology emanates political policies. And for policies to be promoted or presented to the masses, to the electorate, you then need propaganda. And this was the priority within Nazi Germany, or within the Nazi Party, before 1933. This was the priority of Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels didn't really question ideology, he didn't really question policy, he just saw it as his role within the party to deliver the message. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. I've highlighted at the top that this is about Nazi agency, and what I've got in this little box on the left hand side, written in green, are the things that the Nazis did not have control of. And I think it's worthwhile keeping this in mind. Economic crises and the actions of elites who will play their part in giving Hitler the role of Chancellor. The Nazis don't really have control over these things. They can respond to these events and instances, but they don't have control over them. But when it comes to ideology, policy and propaganda, they are very much in control of their own destiny. So when the Nazis come to power, yes, there is very much this economic, structural, external force that assists them, but they still play the Nazis still play a really important part in taking advantage of the situation, the environment that they find themselves in. So let's move on from what we mean by propaganda to examples. So this is really the same diagram with a few kind of arrows and words added. Again, this is not going to really be a great surprise to you, right? Because what we have here are maybe not that different to what you have in contemporary political campaigning. Propaganda can only really, I guess, be delivered to the population, i.e. messages about policy and ideology can only really be delivered to the population in certain ways. Now I guess in contemporary society we have got this new means of communication, which is obviously social media, but in terms of exploiting the media of the day, right, so the media of the 1930s was what we see on this list. The Nazis are really at the kind of the vanguard of propaganda and election campaigning. They are kind of far beyond other political movements at this point, both in Europe and in the United States. Now, all political parties at this point had newspapers, right? The Nazis had a number of newspapers. One of them is, the most famous one is known as the Völkischer Beobachter, which was their daily newspaper, and it was used obviously to present Nazi ideas, policies, and so on. But newspapers can only do so much, and that was really the view of Hitler and Goebbels, that the written word was less likely to stir emotions within individuals in the way that voice and visual sources could do much more effectively. But newspapers had a role to play, right? You couldn't be a political party in Germany in the 1930s and not have a newspaper. We'll talk actually a bit about a propaganda newspaper of Goebbels in a moment. Film was very popular for the Nazis as a propaganda tool. Probably the thing that gives them an edge over other political movements. The leader of the DNVP party, right, that's the German Nationalist People's Party, was a guy called Alfred Hugenberg. And Hugenberg, although he was the head of a different political party, this political party, the DNVP, was still on the far right. And they saw within the Nazis the possibility of a mass movement of kind of right-wing thinking and right-wing ideology that would actually be quite in line with the ideas of the DNVP, very much anti-Marxist, anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-trade unionist. So what Hugenberg does is he owns the UFA Film Company, Germany's largest film and cinema company, and he allows the Nazis to film short clips. So if you were going to go to see a movie, before that movie begins, you would get a newsreel, and on that newsreel would be Hitler speaking and getting his message across. And this is actually quite an effective way of kind of, if you like, transporting Hitler around the country without him actually having to physically move. People can see and hear him in cinemas up and down and all across Germany. So it does give the Nazis maybe this little advantage. It might explain why some people vote for Hitler having never seen or heard him speak in the flesh, or never even seen any Nazis, or having even a Nazi organisation within their vicinity. They are able to benefit from the fact that Hitler has this little advantage of cinema. Posters is the next on the list. I'm going to come back to that last because we're going to look at some Nazi propaganda posters. Parades were quite popular. That what I guess the Nazis do that other political movements do not do in the 1930s is that they take election campaigning very seriously, and they go to small towns and small villages and they get their message out, even if the message isn't always directly political, even if they're not always necessarily preaching to the people that they encounter. What they do manage to do successfully is they just get themselves out there. They become more widely known. Big political parties, especially the kind of middle class liberal parties, DDP, DVP, they're not going to small areas. They don't have the means, the resources, they don't have the rank and file who can do this, but the Nazis do, and they go and they put on parades and torchlight processions, and the SA play a really key role in this, right? This is the Nazi kind of paramilitary organisation led by Ernst Röhm. The SA are really key to this, and the SA even put on gymnastics displays. There's a kind of entertainment element to the Nazis on tour, if you like, around the country, and this will mean that people will be attracted to this movement. It's like the Nazis care by making the effort to go to small remote parts of the country in the way that others do not. Radio is becoming more popular by the 1930s. It doesn't become really popular actually until after the Nazis come to power, but Hitler can get his messages out to the population via radio. But much more important for Goebbels, much more important for Hitler, and we'll look at an example of this as well later on, a little extract from Mein Kampf, is the mass meetings that Hitler and the Nazis use frequently to not just get the message across, but to create something else, a sense of emotion and attachment, which we'll come back to. So these are really the approaches that the Nazis used. I'm going to show you later on a little link to a primary source from 1931 called Will and Way. Will and Way was a Joseph Goebbels propaganda publication that was issued in 1931, and basically a newspaper. And in this first edition of Will and Way, Goebbels actually does list the different methods that can be used to convince the population to come around to the Nazi way of thinking. I'll just quote Goebbels directly. He's talking about the Nazis, right? He says, "No other political movement has understood the art of propaganda as well as the National Socialists, the Nazi Party. From its beginning, it has put its heart and soul into propaganda. What distinguishes the Nazis from all other political parties is the ability to see into the soul of the people and speak the language of the man in the street. It uses all the means of modern technology, leaflets, handbills, posters, mass demonstrations, the press, stage, film and radio. These are the tools of our propaganda." So what I've really just presented to you here are what Goebbels refers to as the tools of propaganda. Whether or not they serve or harm the people depends on the way in which they are put. I'm going to come back to this document in a moment. But what we kind of see here is that Goebbels believes that the Nazis are able to get into the heart and soul of not just propaganda, but into the heart and soul of the German voter. And he is very keen on getting clear messages out to the German people. Thinks that clarity plays a big part in shaping how people will vote and give their support to political movements. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but I thought it was important to just express that Goebbels refers to these approaches here as the tools of propaganda. So let's focus on some of these tools. These are probably the most vivid expressions of Nazism, and I've picked 3 posters that kind of cover the kind of main views of the Nazi Party prior to them coming to power, and I think therefore we get a good idea as to how propaganda was targeted at certain sections of the population. And they're pretty, some of these are pretty grotesque, but they are definitely eye-catching. I think that's the most important thing, and Goebbels and the Nazis are pretty successful in getting their views across via the poster. The poster, I guess, is the one thing, the one visual that everybody can see if they are spread across towns and cities across Germany. And because, as I mentioned earlier, the Nazis have the rank and file to take and carry out this arduous task of putting up posters, they can have a much more visual presence than other political movements. I'll run through these very quickly just to give you an idea as to what they are saying. The first one says Arbeiter, der Stirn, der Faust. This refers to workers, right? Arbeiter means workers, and it says workers of the mind and workers of the fist, or the hands, joined together with the front soldier Adolf Hitler. So this is really an anti class division poster. This is saying if you're German, the most important thing is that you come together. And in the way that during World War I, Germans came together in the trenches, with Hitler, who fought during the First World War. And it doesn't matter if you're middle class and you use your mind as your tool to work, or if you use your fist and you're working class, it makes no difference. So this is really what I mentioned in the previous lesson. This is the Nazi attempt to create or establish what we call the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community, that what was more important than anything else was your Germanness, and that you should put nation before anything else. Class divisions should be rejected. The second poster, the one in the middle, as I said, is much more graphic, kind of sinister. Tod der Lüge just means death to lies. And there are 2 messages on this snake. The snake, therefore, is depicting the 2 messages that are listed on it. and they are fairly obvious, I think, to interpret. Marximus and Hoc Finance. Marximus also refers to Marxism. Hoc Finance refers to high finance. Now, there's a bit of a contradiction here, right? This suggests that the Nazis are strangling the snake. Also, you see the swastika on the kind of SA man's shirt sleeve. The Nazis are strangling both capitalism, high finance, and Marxism, communism. Where do the Nazis fit in? Well, maybe this is a message to the middle class voters who think, yeah, we are opposed to big business, but also opposed to Marxism, and that definitely fits in with the kind of message of the 25 points, which is very much a middle class programme. But there's something a bit more sinister here. Marxism was often related to the Jews, so it's not an explicit anti-Semitic message. And Hoc Finance and big business, capitalism, banking, for example, often also associated with the Jews. So there's a kind of other message here as well that you can take from this death to lies message that the Nazis put forth. So I think it sums up again quite well the range of groups that are being targeted and the range of groups that the Nazis see as being their enemy. And then the final one is pretty simple. Break the Dawes-Ketting just means break the chains of the Dawes Plan. If you recall, 1924 Dawes Plan was the American assistance, economic assistance to the Nazis that would basically suggest that the Weimar government was accepting terms of Versailles because they were accepting the reparations because the Dawes Plan was put in place to pay back reparations. And the Nazis are saying we want to get away with any recognition of Versailles whatsoever, therefore we will reject the Dawes Plan, we will break free from it, even though the Dawes Plan pumped billions of dollars into the German economy. So across the board, these propaganda posters get their point across. The Volksgemeinschaft, anti-big business / Jews, anti-communist and anti-Versailles messages that were common. If you go to the Sway presentation on My City, and you can click on this link here and you'll get more of these types of propaganda posters that again show how the Nazis tried to convince the population to vote Nazi before 1933 when they come to power. Okay, we're going to start to look at some sources, quite a lot of sources now. And we're going to look at what we might call the historiography. You know, what have historians really said about the importance of propaganda. The little extract that I read earlier on from Goebbels is in this link here, right, which you can click on in your own time if you go to the My City page and click on this way. And it is only a couple of pages long, this document, and it's a real eye-opener as to just how far ahead of the game the Nazis and Goebbels were when it came to propaganda. But it also gives us a little insight into the aims of Goebbels, who Hitler placed a lot of trust in. On the very first page of this source, Will and Way, Goebbels talks about how he's not interested in ideology. In fact, he says that this new newspaper or periodical that he's bringing out is not going to talk about new ideas or developed theory. He says that has already been done. He says the aim of this new publication is to try and make sure that these ideas are going to be realised in the political arena. So propaganda is going to be the main intention of this kind of newspaper. The Nazis and Goebbels are very clear that they are using propaganda. They're happy to say our job is to convince the German population that this is what they should be following. They should be following the Nazi message. There's kind of one or two little things that may be worthwhile pointing out for this document. So again, this is on the second page. What Goebbels says is as follows. He says theoreticians, so that's people who come up with ideologies and policies. He says they found or form political movements, and he says propagandists follow close behind. He says the theoreticians give a movement its intellectual foundations. To some extent, Goebbels is suggesting that's Hitler, right? Because Hitler kind of sets out Nazi ideological position in Mein Kampf. So he says that's the kind of intellectual foundations. He says that the propagandists, however, they put this programmatic content of the movement into the coinage of the people, i.e. they translate it to the population and they spread the theory around. He says the propagandist is nothing without the theorist, but the theorist is also nothing without the propagandist. One can't give political knowledge to the people without the proper means of propaganda. Even the most brilliant political theories, again Goebbels is referring to Hitler, will have no impact unless they are put in the form that people can understand. And this is a big part of Goebbels' message. Keep things simple, repeat, 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 and eventually people will start to believe. Now, I'm recording this on the morning after obviously the infamous, it will become infamous, storming of the American Capitol, right, by Trump's supporters. The one thing I would say about Trump is he is a successful propagandist, and I'm not just talking about 1,000 or so or however many crazies stormed the American Capitol yesterday, right? And what was quite a surreal sight. Talk about the masses who actually voted for him in great numbers in both elections, both in 2012 and 2016. What Trump does, or what Trump's team does, is they just there's one element about how it's different than Goebbels, right? Trump doesn't always go for a clear message. He tries to complicate things quite often, not by having contradictory messages. But the one thing he has been clear on, even before the election of 2012, 2016 and 2020, even before the election of 2020, he made it very clear that the vote was rigged. Even before the vote took place, the vote was rigged, and he just kept repeating this mantra again and again and again and again until we got to that point yesterday. And he's a demagogue who I guess you could say has learned the art of propaganda fairly well. Keep the message simple and clear, and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and that's what Goebbels did. That's what the Nazis eventually would have some success, because they just kept saying the same things again and again. Versailles bad, Marxism bad, Weimar democracy bad, and some people would eventually be open and would adopt these similar views and kind of ideas. So, in your own time, you may want to read that document. You can click on this link and access it. Let's look at Hitler. Number one here says go to document 24 on page 22, so here it is here. This is Hitler writing in Mein Kampf about the importance and significance of propaganda. For Hitler, the message was not actually that important. It was the emotion that emerged from being part of a mass gathering. So I'll read through this very quickly, right? Hitler says in Mein Kampf, mass assemblies are necessary because whilst attending them, the individual who feels on the point of joining a young movement, the Nazi party, and takes alarm if left by himself, so individuals not quite sure if they should really commit themselves to the movement, he receives his first impression of the larger community when he's at this mass meeting, and the impact that the meeting has is that it strengthens and encourages individuals to commit. So they don't have to take alarm, they can commit to the meeting and commit to the movement. He submits himself to the magic influence of what we call mass suggestion, says Hitler. The desires, longings, and indeed the strength of thousands is accumulated in the mind of each individual present. A man who enters such a meeting in doubt and hesitation leaves it inwardly fortified. He's become a member of a community, and that's the key point. That if you sit at home and maybe have political views, or you watch things on TV, you're not going to necessarily feel part of something, even if you can virtually feel part of something on Twitter or whatever. But you, according to Hitler, you really feel part of a movement when you are side by side fellow people who have same ideas or the same longings as yourself, and that's what really commits somebody to the movement. And Hitler thinks this is the most important method of propaganda, the mass meeting, where people kind of come together as one. So that's the first source. The second source I want to show you, again, is linked to the Goebbels article that I've already made reference to. Goebbels really did take propaganda serious, really seriously, that he believed anybody within the Nazi party who was given the serious task of being involved in issuing the Nazi message. He believed that they had to be prepared and organised and educated, if you like, in propaganda techniques. So, Document 27, also from 1931, is a Nazi speaking school, a propaganda school, basically more than anything else, which takes place over the course of 2 weeks. It was held by the National Propaganda Directorate in Bavaria, in Munich, and it's Goebbels who's really responsible for this. The amount of detail and time and attention the Nazis give to trying to instruct potential propagandists within the party is something which only other parties could only kind of aspire to, right? I mean, I'm not saying that the socialists and the communists didn't have political meetings and education workshops, of course they did, right? But this here is meticulous in terms of what Goebbels provides. So it starts on the Monday the 17th of August. It goes through, you can see it's quite detailed, lengthy days that those who attend are expected to engage with. And it goes through all the kind of key Nazi ideological principles and topics. And it starts off with economics, goes through down Thursday 20th of August, the Jewish question, Julius Streicher, one of the most rabid anti-Semites in Nazi history, up there with Hitler, or maybe even worse. Then you've got the labour movement spoken about from a Nazi perspective, race in the 22nd of August spoken about from a Nazi perspective. Then it goes down to looking at Nazi foreign policy, agricultural policy, back to looking at economic policy and Marxism. And then on Tuesday the 25th of August or Wednesday the 26th, depending upon the weather, there's a day off for those who attend, and they get a day off so that they can have a little tour of the Bavarian High Alps, as it says at the top of this image. And then they go back into it, right? So the second week continues, and then the next kind of topic is looking at the regional ways that the Nazis will organise Germany, and it looks at the department stores and cooperatives and how Nazi Germany might try and assist the kind of middle classes by having a different version or view of how to organise business. Then it goes on to law on the Thursday 27th of August. Hitler Youth on Friday the 28th, and it goes on. Himmler even turns up, right? So you're kind of getting the big hitters by this point. And then Feder, who's an important Nazi, they're starting to make names up by the time they get to Dr. Buttman on Saturday and Sunday. And then it goes on and finishes 2 weeks later on Monday the 31st of August. That's pretty intense, stuff. And the Nazi Party, therefore you could argue, are not leaving anything to chance when it comes to propaganda. This is about getting the Nazi message on every topic clear in the heads of those who will go and spread that message across the country. Hitler has got nothing to do with this. He doesn't have to. He's got his underlings doing it for him, and Goebbels is the man responsible for organising and delivering such an event. It's like a 2-week conference. So Nazis take propaganda very seriously. In saying all of that, however, how important was propaganda in convincing the German population to vote Nazi? Remember the bigger picture here, right? Why did people vote Nazi? Was it mostly to do with economic factors? Was it to do with these kind of long-term class divisions that existed, which would make it likely that the ruling elites might want to, remove democracy from Germany? Was the Nazi success due to policies and ideology, or was it to do with propaganda, the way they delivered their message? We've still got another couple of factors to examine in our next lesson, which is looking at the role played by ruling elites, but also what left-wing political parties were doing as well. Why did they not offer enough resistance to Nazism? But on the question of propaganda, I want to take you to the point of this document. This is by an article by the historian David Welch. And Welch, I think, sums up rather well in this little extract underneath where it says the role of propaganda. He sums up well what the Nazi position really is, and how far really propaganda can be used to gain votes and gain members. So I'll read it out and I'll kind of emphasise some key points. So Welch says, I would suggest that propaganda played an important part in mobilising support for the Nazis in opposition and maintaining the party once in power. Well, we're not interested in the party being in power at this point, right? We'll get to that in future topics. He says, but propaganda alone could not have sustained the Nazi party and its ideology over a period of 12 years, right? Well, again, we'll get to that. There's now considerable evidence to suggest that Nazi policies and propaganda reflected many of the aspirations of large sections of the population. Propaganda in Nazi Germany was not, as is often believed, a catch-all process, i.e. that propaganda was not just directed at the entire population, and therefore the entire population would listen to this propaganda and then go and vote Hitler, right? That is not how it worked. It says the revolutionary aim of the Nazi regime to bring about the Volksgemeinschaft, the true harmony of the classes, right, as I spoke about, does highlight the ambitious nature of Nazi propaganda. So it's not to say that there wasn't some desire to try and have an all-encompassing propaganda that would bring, potentially everybody to the Nazis. But that's not how it worked, right? Some people just completely ignored and didn't even listen to Nazi propaganda. And I'll touch on that again in a moment. It says, nevertheless, the success of propaganda should not be measured purely in terms of its ability to radically change opinions and attitudes. And this is a key line, right? If you're going to take a note of any line, this is a key one. Propaganda is as much about confirming as converting public opinion. Propaganda, if it is to be effective, must in a sense preach to those who are already partially converted. So what we mean by that is, and there's a lot of quote by Aldous Huxley below that kind of sums this up, propaganda is really about saying to people who are maybe in the wilderness a little bit, people are not quite sure what their political views are. Propaganda is about saying to these people, you are like us, you are the perfect fit for the Nazi party, you are the perfect Nazi voter, you just don't realise it yet. So Nazi propaganda goes over goes for people and tries to convince people who are maybe already on the pathway to maybe having similar views to those of the Nazis. It convinces people to commit to something that might already be within their mindset. Propaganda, therefore, as Welch says, right, is more about, I think it's a really good way of thinking about it, it's more about confirming rather than converting. And the reason why I think converting is a good word to focus on is because if you are a socialist or a communist, you can be, as much Nazi propaganda could be thrown at you, every day, right? You're not going to be converted because you're ideologically opposed to everything the Nazis stand for. I could sit in a room and be bombarded with propaganda images from right-wing fascist movements. I'm not going to come out of that room and say, well, do you know what, some of these views actually are pretty good, right? That's because I'm ideologically opposed to fascism in all forms and find myself at the other end of the political spectrum. So propaganda can't work wonders, it can't manipulate people. I mean, when we start to look at Nazi propaganda once they're in power, then we're going to have to examine it in a slightly different way, right? Sometimes propaganda can be used as an excuse to justify people's behaviour, but that comes after 1933. Socialists, communists and Catholics do not succumb to Nazi propaganda, hence why they do not vote Nazi, hence why they don't join the Nazi party in the years prior to Hitler becoming Chancellor. And I think that's a very important point to make. So propaganda can only really do so much. It's not to say that if you were being assessed on this topic that you wouldn't include it. You would definitely include it, and you would say that it does play a role in some respects as a factor, if you like. But it can only do so much. Many historians have stressed the importance of propaganda over the years, and the part that it played in appealing to emotions at mass meetings and rallies. There was no political discussions. This was just the Nazi message thrown at people. And Goebbels, really did believe that propaganda was the sharpest weapon in conquering the state. But I think if we overstress propaganda, then we start to ignore the other kind of key factors. So maybe we should always be of the view that propaganda was maybe successful in reinforcing existing sympathies and feelings rather than creating new ones. And that's the kind of key point I want you to take away from this. But still, all the same, an important part of why the Nazis come to power, because the people who do vote Nazi were the ones that the Nazis had to convince, and they successfully convinced those people, the middle classes, some elites, some of the upper middle classes, peasants. Their propaganda does convince these groups. Okay, that's us. Thank you very much.